I'm looking out the window with the sun peeking through, and I'm in the Chicago area, so there's snow on the ground. Good afternoon again. I'm Barbara Wilson. Glad to be your workshop facilitator today. Thank you to Deb Demeister. And Deb, if I've said your last name wrong, you'll let me know that. Glad Deb is with us and all of you. So Deb, would you like to share your screen at this point? All right, thank you so much. So I know you have this handout and I'm not going to read it. Just wanted to draw our attention to our sort of our purpose and our focus for today's workshop, navigating difficult conversations. The emphasis is on the bolded area. What we hope to offer today, and if you've had an opportunity to take a look at this handout, practicality, right? Not only information that's important for us and biblical theological connections, which are the foundation, but also what is it that we can live into together, individually and together, to implement, to bring about healthier conversations, shall we say. And so our rules of engagement for today are from Eric Law. You might be familiar, I'm sure, with him and the Kaleidoscope Institute. And so we want to encourage all of us to take responsibility for what we say and feel without blaming others, because this workshop is designed so that we will have a small, sometime in a small group session, but also then we'll have a good chunk of time for Q&A. And we really do want to hear your questions and your comments about the content that is presented and how you engage it and how you are experiencing it. And of course, we want to use empathetic listening and be sensitive to all of the differences in the ways in which we communicate and our cultural styles. We want to think, right? Ponder before we speak. We acknowledge that in this workshop and others, as it relates to difficult conversations, all of us have triggers. There are things that are said, or the space itself, or that is the virtual space, whatever may be happening that brings up in us some discomfort and some emotions. We honor that. So we will all ponder and think and take a deep breath before we speak. And of course, this particular workshop is practical in encouraging us to examine our own assumptions and perceptions instead of those of others. It's a deeper dive to look at ourselves. And then, of course, confidentiality. Some of us may share information that we are encouraging all of us to maintain that confidentiality in this space. The last one I love, because tolerate ambiguity, right? We have to just hold the tension in that, as Parker Palmer would say. We're not here to debate. There are no winners, there are no losers. And so with that, I want to share with you, before we do our group exercise, a quick story. This is a true story written a few years ago about a teenager who was blessed to do volunteer work at a senior citizen home and for the summer. And as a part of her work, she was given an assignment to go and talk with one patient who had been silent for years, not unconscious, simply silent. And so the young lady's job was to go in, take her basket of beads, and just start stringing beads and sit with the woman and even talk with her and invite her to join in stringing the beads. So this young lady was really shocked, because day after day, week after week, she would go into the room and she was just curious as to why this woman was sitting there staring out the window, not saying a word. The woman's back was to the young lady. So finally, after a few weeks, the young lady just could not contain her curiosity. And on her way out of the room, she turned around and said, "What are you looking at?" And it was so fascinating, because the woman began to turn around slowly and face the young lady, and her face was shining bright. And she simply said, "Why, child, I'm looking at the light." The light. So our invitation to all of us today is, in this experience of a few minutes that we have, right? We are looking at the light. Let's pray. Gracious God, we thank you for all who have joined this virtual space. We thank you for their gifts and graces, their service and ministries as a part of the Church of Jesus Christ. Now, Holy Spirit, remain, abide, and strengthen us through Jesus Christ. Amen. Thank you so much. Okay, here's a video that we are inviting you to view, and then post in the chat your reflections, your responses to the video. Thank you so much, Deb. So I invite each of you to post in the chat. It can be one word, phrase. What did you see as you watch this video? What did you see? And I'll just note what I'm seeing as you are putting it in. Life, suffering, aware that even the subtitles don't tell the whole story. Suffering. Everyone is dealing with something. And of course, I'm pulling out parts of the chat. I encourage you to look as well. Read through the chat. Learning empathy for all, compassion, so much under the surface. Yes, absolutely. Pain, more human mercy needed. Keep going. Life isn't easy. Compassion, unknowable experiences. Someone saw the joy. We are all in this thing of life. So I want to stop, thank you for, and keep going. If there's more for you to put in this chat, what did you see? We show this video and we know it's in the healthcare context, but also because it's a wonderful, heartfelt, right? It connects head and heart about the human condition. We all are walking around, even today, if not walking, we are moving around. We are in this virtual space together, and we all come with some wonderful things that are happening in our lives. We come with joy. We come with celebrations. We saw celebrations in the video. And at the same time, we come with challenges. We come with grief. We come with difficulties. And we highlight this because we are encouraging us to deepen our capacity to have empathy for ourselves first, in order to have any difficult conversations, right? And to navigate the difficult conversations about any topics, whether it's our families and our congregations, the service we're doing on committees, commissions, community. This thing of empathy is most important. And so empathy, deepening our understanding and embracing that we all come to our daily life and living and difficult conversations, dealing with both joy and celebration, and also with pain and suffering and difficulties. And so with that, we're going to go into a small group exercise. And there's only one question, and there'll be about 4 of you in each breakout room. And as on the handout, it asks the question, and I really want us to focus in on this question. What gives you energy and hope about relational ministry? That is about collaboration, about building partnerships as the church, the body of Jesus Christ. What gives you energy and hope? So let's celebrate what is good, what is helpful, what is forward moving as we serve and live and work together as the church. And you'll have about 6 minutes to share with one another. Thanks, Deb.
Hi, Lisa. Welcome to this workshop. People are in small groups, but they are just ending. So I would just recommend know that they'll all be here and they'll start coming back any second now.
Thanks very much. Sorry to be late.
Welcome back. Those who are still chatting in their small groups, they'll be forced to come back in 26 seconds.
Deb, you're in a car. Where are you?
I'm on vacation in Florida and we have terrible internet in our room. So I went and found 4 bars with my phone.
Well, I hope it's a pretty day since you're sitting in your car.
So hello, everybody. I hope every conversation was as rich as the one I was privileged to be a part of. And the reason we want to tap into what we are celebrating is because we already know. We know what some of our challenges are as the church, both as individuals and collectively, right? Whether it's our small group, a mission team, the session, the committee for working on gun violence or the environment, whatever place in the church, local, regional, national, that we happen to be living and serving, we all know what the challenges are in this thing of having conversations around difficult issues. And so it's good every now and then to tap into what we can celebrate, what's going well, where is the joy, where is the hope, and that can help us. So Margaret Wheatley, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, this quote comes from the book Turning to One Another, right? And I won't do what sometimes facilitators do and say, somebody read that. I'll just read it because I want us to hear the language. I believe we can change the world. I believe we can change the world if we start listening to one another again. Simple, honest, human conversation, not mediation, not negotiation, not problem solving, not debate, I'm adding words, of course, not public meetings, simple, truthful conversation where we each have a chance to speak, we each feel heard, forgive my typos, and we each listen well. So what would it feel like to be listening to each other again about what disturbs and troubles us? Because we all have things that disturb us and trouble us. What would it feel like to be listening to each other again about what gives us energy and hope, about our yearnings, our fears, our prayers, our children? And so these are some foundational pieces that we're offering for our consideration when we think about how do we navigate difficult conversations. The focus here, we hope today that we all become open to is, it's not actually about the other person we're engaging in conversation with. It's about us. It's about the ways in which I, Barbara Ann, that I myself, my energy, my understanding of my own strengths and yes, and giftings, but also my own challenges. And so my willingness to fully engage and my understanding of how I view whomever it is I'm talking with. So with that, just one more video. It's only 3 minutes. It's Donna Hicks, who wrote the book about dignity. Thanks, Dee.
So what I'd like to begin with is sharing with you my understanding of what dignity means. I've really worked a lot on this, and it took me a while to come to an understanding of what it is. And after researching it for such a long time, I finally came to the conclusion that it's a very simple concept. And we don't want to complicate it either, because the simpler the better, and everybody will understand what dignity means if the concept is simple. And so my understanding is that dignity is our inherent value and worth. Every single one of us, we all have dignity. We're born with it. It's part of who we are as a human being. And we all have inherent value and inherent worth. And in fact, I would even argue that we are not only valuable and worthy, but that we're invaluable, that we're priceless, and that we're irreplaceable. So my definition is really very simple, that our dignity is our inherent value and worth. And there's another piece to it, which is our dignity is also very vulnerable, and vulnerable to being harmed and injured. So yes, we have an inherent value and worth, but at the same time, it is so prone to being injured and wounded. And frankly, I think that's probably as equally as an important part of the definition as, you know, the first part of the equation. So another aspect of the definition, and really I think is important to clarify, is that I think dignity is very different from respect. I often, whenever I give a talk, I'll ask people just to tell me, what do you think dignity is? I just take ideas from the audience. And inevitably, the first thing people say is respect. And oddly enough, if you pay attention to when you hear the word dignity, you'll hear it as if it's all one word, dignity and respect. This is just what people do, and they confuse it. And it's a problem because, as I said earlier, I think our dignity is, everybody has dignity. Every human being who's born on the planet has dignity. But with respect, I think respect is earned. So when you confuse those two things, especially in my field in international conflict, where people are clamoring, we want to be treated with respect. We must be treated with respect. But I think what they really want to say is, treat me with dignity. Treat me as a human being. Because, if you're in a conflict and you don't respect the other side, then you're going to have trouble getting that out of your opponent or your enemy. But if we make the claim that everybody deserves dignity, and what needs to happen here as part of the resolution process of these conflicts is to try to restore the dignity to the relationship, that's very different from demanding respect from people.
Wow. So thank you, Deb. And of course, Deb, I've given you a nickname, D. I keep wanting to call you D, but this is Deb. So apologies for that. So now, dignity reminds me of some of our theological underpinnings, which would be the Imago Dei. And so, right, all humans are made in the image of God and therefore have value and worth. Oftentimes, and let me invite us to begin to put any questions you have in the chat, and we'll come back to that at the Q&A. So thank you for doing that ahead of time. So Donna Hicks in this dignity model would say, yes, everybody born inherently has dignity. And I wonder and encourage us to consider then for ourselves, right? First, how we are engaging with others, whether these are friends, whether these are members of congregation, whether these are people that we are in partnership around mission, whatever the relationships or the associations, am I bringing myself to that engagement, to the conversation in a way that honors the dignity of the people with whom I'm talking? And that's something that we are suggesting. If we're going to navigate difficult conversations, we need to be willing to do that. And I need to start my timer so I stop and move on where I need to. So that's a really question, and I really invite us to breathe that in. And that's why we have on the handout the 10 essential elements of dignity. So I want to give you a quick example. The names and the locations and all of that remain not said. However, in conversations with leaders, the most that I will say as these are Presbyterians, right? And I get to have these conversations in other contexts as well, ecumenically and both interreligiously. And in one conversation, we were talking about social unrest well before COVID. So this was, say, 4 or 5 years ago. And the comment came up, well, we don't know what to do. And so I simply asked a question. Do we believe that all people are made in God's image and therefore have value and worth, the Imago Dei? We say it, it's in our polity, Presbyterians, Christians, we say we believe this. And one courageous person said, well, Barbara, I don't know that we all believe that in practice, right? So what I'm seeking to help us think about, not for shame or blame, remember, that's not what this is about, right? This is about doing some critical self-reflection around who we say we are as followers of Jesus Christ. And with that, there is no condemnation. So this is not about bashing any human being, right? This is about, if we're going to have difficult conversations, we have to be willing to do our own self-analysis through the lens of our faith. And so in order for me to honor the dignity of others, I have to name my own stereotypes that I really believe. I have to do that, right, for myself. If I have implicit bias, and every human being has implicit bias, we have them, then I have to name that for myself. So how do stereotypes that I subscribe to, how does my implicit bias and other things within me, other thoughts about those people or the group in the congregation who's on the periphery, they're not in your inner circle. That's another way to look at this. Then how can I expect to have a conversation about difficult matters if indeed I don't see the other as human, made in God's image, and therefore having value and worth, even though I might disagree with their political stance, might disagree with whatever it is. And that's what the essential elements of dignity are about, right? And I'm just going to pull out a couple of these. Acceptance of identity. Approach people as neither inferior nor superior to you. That's a hard one. We can all say that. So I'll go ahead and say the amen, right? We in thinking, in theory, in our minds, yes. But as we all know, in practice, that becomes a bit more difficult. Another one is recognition. Validate others for their talents, their hard work, their thoughtfulness. It doesn't mean I know them. I don't have to be friends with everybody in order to honor their dignity and my own. So that's food for thought. And then Donna Hicks goes even further, which can help us in our own growth and development and following Jesus as Christians. She talks about the temptations to violate dignity. And when we violate dignity, according to Hicks, we violate not only the dignity of the other, but I'm violating my own dignity. Because at the end of the day, if I believe that I am made in God's image and I have value and worth, then there are some ways in which I engage, in which I speak, in which I act, that I can violate my own dignity. One of the ways is, she says, shirking responsibility. Don't shirk responsibility when you have violated the dignity of others. You know, sometimes what's needed before a difficult conversation about a difficult issue is that we need to apologize. And sometimes apologies are not based on what I thought I did. It's based on impact. So the difference between my intention and the impact of my words, the impact of my actions, that's what this dignity model is about. And that's a very, very different approach. So I have to leave that there with dignity. We're going to move on in the interest of time. So put your questions, make note of your questions, and we will hear your thoughts, your comments in a few minutes. So framework number 2. Some of you might be familiar with MIT and the Presencing Institute. Some of you may have heard about Theory U already. And myself and 3 other persons in our presbytery a few years back were blessed to go to that foundation program and learn what this is. And quite frankly, as Christians, we found great resonance and we were all Presbyterians, we found great resonance in ego to eco leadership. So this is another framework to look at ourselves first. Great, you're beginning to put questions in. Thank you. Ego to eco leadership, whatever service you're giving, whatever your leadership, and it doesn't mean you hold a title, right? Whatever service and your spheres of influence are, you're a leader as a part of the church. So how do we move from focused on my own agenda, because we all have agendas, and it doesn't mean an agenda is always a negative thing, but how do I move from what I want and what benefits me, my family, or my congregation, or my mission team, or my group of friends? How do we move from that to eco awareness, which is how am I and what I'm doing and what I want impacting the whole system? The system being the congregation, the system being the mission team I'm a part of, the system being the session. So this framework invites us to tap into our collective capacities, and I'm just pulling from the handout you already have. And one way to do that is to begin to look at our own blind spots. And so in order to have these difficult conversations, we have to be willing to look at our own blind spots, because we all have them. And so this thing about considering having an open heart, open mind, open will, that's what this framework is about. It's inviting each one of us right where we are to choose to have an open heart, open mind, open will. Sounds almost like discipleship for me, right? This process of spiritual growth and development. So if we want to really have difficult conversations, this is the kind of inner work that we each have to choose to do to come to the conversation with open mind, open heart, open spirit. And that means also, according to this particular framework, that I have to choose to quiet the voices of fear, judgment, and cynicism. Now, I know I'm not the only person that resonates with, because we all have within us, about whatever the concern is, the voices of judgment. I know we're not supposed to judge, right? We know what we believe as Christians and what we subscribe to. And yet there are times that all of us are very much tempted and maybe do judge other people. And if I am judging others, how can I have a difficult conversation with you? How can we have honest, authentic, genuine, truth-telling, and deep listening and empathy if the voices of fear, if my fear for talking with you and my fear is such at a high place, and I've not attended to my fear, I've not engaged in practices that will help lessen my anxiety about the conversation, if I have not tapped into some of my spiritual resources, right? But I come to this conversation in high anxiety and high fear, then what I want to say before we move to the next framework, you know the neuroscience. If I come led by my emotions, that amygdala, the base of the skull, the brain, that's my amygdala is in control, not the prefrontal cortex, the seat of wisdom and insight and knowledge. And so what we're trying to say with this particular framework, we have to choose to do again some of that inner work to prepare ourselves to have the difficult conversation. All right, and then finally, the third framework is one I think probably some of you know, and then we're going to go into some Q&A because we want to have a little more dialogue here. Some of you may have had community organizing training. I know Next Church has led in that, and some of our synods and presbyteries have led in that. And so you've heard about what one-on-ones are. They're also called relational meetings. We do one-on-ones all the time, but sometimes when we think about community organizing, because we may have some bad experiences with organizers or some difficulties that have arisen through some of that social justice, direct action work, we think, oh, I don't want to have anything to do with a one-on-one. But I'm saying, and Alexia Salvatierra would also say, all of us do one-on-ones because we build relationships with folk we want to build them with. We reach out, we start having conversations, we find out what your interests are, and I share my interests. And that's why we may decide we're going to all work on gun control, or we're going to all work on, I don't know, feeding the homeless, whatever the thing is we decide we're going to work on. It happens because we have begun to have conversations and decide together these are things we're interested in. But I want to shift our thinking about one-on-ones to this faith-rooted approach to one-on-ones. And briefly, what this means is traditional organizers who have been trained in traditional methods, Saul Alinsky, and some of you may be familiar with that through IAF and other organizations, they have one-on-one conversations just to move forward their agenda. They want to know who's with me on this side of the issue, who's on my side of the issue. That's not what I'm talking about. That's not faith-rootedness. Faith-rootedness connects our being with our doing. So in other words, I'm connecting with you. Maybe we don't have anything in common other than, since I'm talking with Christian folk, the fact that we all follow Jesus Christ. And then if that's not what we have in common, the fact that you're human and I am too. And so I can choose to come to a conversation and have a conversation, do some deep listening about what matters to you, what brings you joy, and how we might begin to work together within our church, within our community. That's what one-on-one relational meetings can do. They can be very powerful. And people who are approaching those from a faith-rooted perspective do so with people who are on opposite sides of the issues. So this means that if I know, now I'm going to jump on off and take a risk here, all beloved. If I know that I'm of one political persuasion and somebody else in my congregation is of another, the question becomes, can we come together and have a conversation, not about the politics of it, but as human beings made in the image of God, having value and worth, and actually listening to each other and see what the Spirit of the living God might really reveal to us about some ways that we should be, as God calls us, to serve together and work together. Or we can choose to allow all of the differences, and we can name them, but we won't, to cause us not to have the very conversations we need to have. So now we've got just over 15 minutes left, and I would love to stop going on about things, and I'm going to open the chat. And Deb, could you put us in gallery view instead of pinning me? Because we're going to see if we can begin to, and I know there are 46, so I will have to scroll to another screen. So let's see here. Let me get to a question.
I have unpinned Barbara, but you may need to hit gallery view on your own to get out of speaker view.
Thank you for that reminder, Deb. I actually had to do that also. Okay, so one question that we have here, what would a definition of respect then, what would be a definition of respect then that emphasizes the difference between dignity and respect? Well, I would invite you to answer that question. The difference for Donna Hicks is really simple. Respect is not inherent. Dignity is. Respect is earned. That's her difference. That's what the model says for her. That's what she has named based on the research that she has done in the world of international conflict resolution and management, right? So that's her definition. So the invitation is for us then, what is our definition around dignity? Even if you say, you know what, I disagree with her, they're the same, go for it. That's not a problem. What we're encouraging us to do is to know what we believe. Are all people, by virtue of being born, do all people have dignity? And if you say dignity and respect are the same, then that belief, or if you believe dignity and respect are separate, how can what we believe impact the way we're talking with others and engaging with others? So that was a good question. Thank you. How do you have an authentic conversation with someone whose views are not based in science? Well, that's a good question. Wow. What do Christians do? Because there are views. If we have, first of all, that question, I would want to unpack it and debrief it a little bit. So when we say their views are not based in science, what does that really mean? What particular science are we talking about? And so that question is awesome because it presupposes that I need to know, that one would need to know somebody else's views in order to have a conversation. And these frameworks would say that's not the case. In fact, having the conversation in a way that is honorable in terms of the dignity of all, and that quiets my own thoughts about science. If I really want to get to know someone else and have a difficult conversation, you can name any subject you want. Maybe science is the conversation. So I would need to know, in order to debrief that a little bit more, what does authentic for you mean then? And how would you know their views aren't based in science, other than if someone says, I don't believe all of that? Well, maybe a good conversation, respecting the humanity of the person and doing some deep listening, might help us learn a little bit more. So I don't know if that answers any of your question, Kathy. Do you have anything else you'd like to say about your question for clarity? Okay, no, okay. I think I saw, oh, there, Kathy, she said no. Okay, here's another question. Oh, someone made a comment. Okay, Chris, thank you. Yes, Kathy, and not just science, it extends to pure common sense and breadth of mind to understand the situation. So how do you have those conversations, and is common sense common? And could it be that our thoughts about the other doesn't have common sense? Maybe it's me that doesn't have the common sense. So that's why we invite this inner look, because we humans do this. We begin to make, we have presumptions, we have expectations of others, and but we won't begin to talk with people and listen and learn and share, so that we clarify whether what I'm thinking is really the case. So it's difficult if we want to have answers to questions like that. Say, well, Barbara doesn't have common sense, and you know what, I just can't talk with her. Well, what does our spirituality, right, have to say about that? What does our God say about that, right? We have any number of examples in the Bible full of conflict, tough conversations. So I'm saying these questions are quite valid, and we have resources at our disposal to test out our assumptions, our expectations that maybe nobody else knows that you have, but that's how we are measuring whether or not we want to talk with somebody else. Nicole has a hand up. Go ahead, Nicole. I'm gonna look at the other screen too.
Unmute there. I just, one of the things I'm struggling with is how to get people of different perspectives to the table. I feel like having open dialogue, honestly, is kind of a liberal value. And the more conservative folks aren't necessarily motivated to participate in that.
Okay.
I wonder if you can address that. Yeah.
I can, and what I would say is, I want to reframe that a little bit. I don't think it's simply one group of folks, liberal, conservative. We put those labels on folk. At the very basic understanding of human existence, we don't build relationships well, because we typically build relationships with people who are like us, who think like us, who act like us. We fall out sometimes, we have conflict and whatever, but we'll build those relationships. In order to have difficult conversations, we have to be willing to do these one-on-ones. Are we willing just to contact somebody and say, you know what, I just like to share and have a conversation? Is that doable? So if we are willing to create opportunities for relationship building, which brings us to the dignity question, Do you just want to know what I want to know and what I think as a Black female? And not you, Nicole, you and just everybody.
Mhm.
You really want to know and hear who I am. Those are two different questions. And remember, we take steps to build relationships with people we want to. And that's why we're able then to have some of the hard conversations and say, well, let's take a breather and let's all think about that and we'll come back together. It's the same process with others. But it's difficult to reach out to have a conversation about a hot topic if that's all we're interested in, because all of us come with a breadth of experiences around these topics. Some of us come with, all of us, a lack of understanding fully about certain topics. So there's so many dynamics involved. Do we want to prayerfully take the time to get to know some people and see how a relationship can develop? To do that takes energy on my part. It takes courage on my part. And quite frankly, it's easier for me to just stay away. And there are reasons for that, for all of us to do that. Good questions. Let's try to keep going here. We have about 9 minutes left. Let's see here. Dignity or lack thereof seems to be at the root of problems with police. How might Christians bring this concept into public debate with and distrust of police? Would it take long for police to change their approach? Okay, so hey, I'm loving it. We leaning in today. Well, first of all, as a person who's a former federal investigator and who worked both as a prison guard in a federal prison, all male, medium security, and for the U.S. Drug Enforcement right here in Chicagoland, all on with other local regional folk, and in U.S. probation and parole, and in juvenile court, Cook County in Chicago area, I understand the question. So again, though, before wanting to have the conversation with the root problem with police, let's attend to how we are approaching the conversation. And all law enforcement are not bad. So the difficulty, the stereotype, and the things that are happening within a system, just like within our congregations, just like within the national church, I'm talking about systems now, the strengths and the whatever works well, whatever works doesn't. Individuals make up a system. So yes, I would imagine there is dignity and a lack thereof. How might we bring this concept into public debate? I would say not bring the concept, live the concept. It's from the inside out. Begin to engage with one another in your local context, in all of the work that the church is doing in ways that brings not the concept, but brings the practice of dignity. How can we be examples to show other people how to begin to have the conversations? And you might be surprised in building relationships with some folk in law enforcement, you'll be surprised to hear they think just like you about dignity. So I'm saying, and then if you want to bring this into the public debate, then we do it right where we are. It begins with one conversation here, one conversation there. What would happen if you hosted a community conversation? But in order to host a community conversation, there needs to be some preparation. The why, the what, and how we're going to facilitate this conversation. So yes, what would it take for police to change their approach from bad guy approach to approach with dignity? Well, first of all, that's all police would not say they have a bad guy approach. And there are some understandings about policing that we may not have. There's not really always a bad guy approach. I hope you're hearing what I'm saying. Things are not always what they seem and are presented by the media. So this means if I'm willing to have conversations with my local police chief or the beat officer who covers the area around the church, and simply begin to listen and have some conversations and then share in a way that is respectful and honors the dignity, we might be surprised what we might learn. And that's where we start. Let's see, 5 minutes to go. Let's see what else we have. In 2 words, better training. I would agree with better training. The only thing I would offer very respectfully is that training by itself doesn't help. How many times do we, you see, hey, we humans, we Christians, Presbyterians are very highly trained. But what happens after the training? So unless we implement what we learned, unless we internalize it and live into it, then more training just doesn't do it by itself. And that includes, after we are trained, what are our measures for accountability? Whether it's policing, whether it's in the congregation, accountability, not shaming, but how do we hold ourselves accountable when we are operating and doing church in ways that impacts others, whether the others are in the congregation or in the community? You know, these are questions of power. Are we willing to share power? Economics? So what I'm suggesting is these are good questions, and some of these questions require some deeper looks, right? There are no quick answers. It's not a problem solving situation if we want to have these difficult conversations. Folks are waiting to have them until we can meet in person. Maybe some people are. Barbara Ann would say to you, that's a little bit of a smokescreen, my humble opinion. I'm having fantastic, in the ministry I get to do, I'll just name within Chicago Presbytery, I'm continuing to have one-on-one conversations, small group conversations, people who are wanting to have these conversations while virtual may not be the preferred method. The question becomes, what's our motivation and what's at stake here? What's the impact of not having the conversations, whether it's virtual or not? Some things are being done on the telephone too, I will say that. So that's valid, that, oh my goodness, I don't really like this. Okay, that's acceptable. Then what? Thank you for your presence today. It looks like we have about 3 minutes left. Someone says, how do we get past the fear? I wonder what our faith would help us do with that. What biblical story resonates? Not these are rhetorical. What biblical stories, right, resonate with you that speak to fear and that speak about courage and consider the cost of your courage? Sometimes I've had over the years, many years in ministry, that people will often say, which I understand it, you don't understand, I got friends in this church. So we all have to count the cost. What's the cost of my leaning into the faithfulness which God has called me to? It may cost me a friend or two. So what I'm trying to say is some things will break our hearts, and I don't have an answer for that. There is no quick and easy fix. I want to thank you all. There is a survey to fill out. You see the link in the chat. I am open to any additional reach out conversations. I think you have the email, and would love to continue. So thank you. You have been most engaged in this particular workshop. Go for it would be my final words in about a minute and a half. Keep your questions, and then let's continue to do that work to see what does the book, what does God have to say? Enter into prayerful discernment, not only alone, but with others, and begin or continue the journey to just lean in a little bit more. And part of that will be resisting the need to have all my questions answered. It just is not the way. I appreciate this. This has been awesome. Thank you, Deb. And thank you, guys. I think they're going to close us in a few seconds. So awesome. Blessings to all of you.
I unmuted so you can hear my applause, Barbara. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Very helpful.
Thank you. You're awesome. Reach out to me.
Thanks for the handout too. It's great.
Oh, thank you.
I am going to reach out to you, Barbara, because part of my ministry is with police officers. So I was really intrigued by your background, so I'm going
Oh,
to,
my.
I'll, you'll hear from me again.
Oh, I'd love it. Well, no, listen, make no mistake, there's corruption. But now I'm
Oh,
gonna
yeah.
jump in. There's corruption in the church. So, hey, we all have to step up to the plate. So anyway,
Mhm.
I love
Yep.
it.
Yeah.
Well, we got a message
Thank
saying that
you.
they would cut us off, but they haven't, but I guess they will. Thank you, Deb. Tell me your last name,
You're
because I think
welcome.
I've been mispronouncing it.
It's fine. It's Demeester. It rhymes with
Denise.
Easter, our holy season. So Demeester.
Demeester.
Mhm.
Thank you. Well, blessings,
Yep.
everybody. I
Yep.
guess we'll log off.
Thank you.
Take care.
Yep.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.